Hey guys, Eddie here at Hypestore.com, and today we're going to be talking about normal maintenance on your chainsaw chains. These are the kind of things you want to do in the field while you're using it, before you use it, after you fill up a tank. Those sort of normal maintenance items that you really need to address and you really need to know how to do. Now this video is not specifically about sharpening chains. It's really about inspecting your chains, keeping it sharp, and maintaining the geometry of the cutting teeth. If you're a novice chainsaw user, I think you'll get something out of this, so stay tuned. Now everybody that uses a chainsaw is going to get to some point where your chain is just not cutting as well as it should. And 9 times out of 10, this is something you can do in the field. You don't have to put it in a vise, you don't have to, do a complete resharpen on the chain. What you're doing is maintaining the chain. You're maintaining the edge of the teeth, you're making sure you don't have any problems with the geometry of the chain, you don't have any problems with the bar. And basically the things you need to look out for with a non-sharp chain or a chain that needs to be maintained or sharpened. It's things like it taking more effort to use your saw to make a cut, throwing out sawdust instead of chips, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like. If your chainsaw is smoking while cutting, that can also be an indication that your chainsaw needs to be maintained, your chain needs to be maintained. So in the field, we can do this right on the ground, or we can sit on a stump and put it in our lap and do this. Once you get used to doing it, it takes 2 or 3 minutes to go through it, check your chain, make sure you're ready to cut that day.
Now I think we can all imagine what sawdust looks like. This is what you're looking for though coming out of your chainsaw. You don't want sawdust, you want something like this. A nice chip. Now it might be bigger, it might be a little smaller depending on the size of your chain, but this is basically what you want to see coming off your chain. Not dust, not sawdust, chips. Oh, and by the way, make sure you stick around to the end because we have a special deal going on at Hipa right now where you can get a free chainsaw chain. So let's go into the shop and I'll show you some up-close video of what I'm talking about. The kind of things you can do on the ground here, but just to make it easier to film, we'll film it in the shop.
You will need a few tools for this job. These include a fine or medium cut flat file, a round chain file of the correct size, and this file can be attached to a sharpening guide, or you can just use the file. The sharpening guide is nice if you have never done this job, but is not required. You'll also need a depth gauge for adjusting the rakers, though this is not strictly necessary either once you have the experience. Though it does have another use, which I will show you in a moment. You may also want to wear a pair of gloves with this, although again this is not strictly necessary, and I actually think I get a better feel for what I'm doing without the gloves. First, make sure your chain brake is off, so the chain moves freely. And also make sure your chain is tensioned properly. We have a video available showing how to tension your chain. I'll put a link in the description. Roll the chain through and inspect it, looking for any odd-shaped cutters or broken teeth. If you find something odd, you may want to change the chain or take it to a professional sharpener to address the issue. Before we begin, let's make sure we know the parts of the cutters. Here you can see the cutting tooth and the depth setting tooth, or the raker. From the top, you can see that some will face right and some will face left. When we sharpen, it is easiest to do one direction all the way around the chain and then switch hands and do the others facing the other way. Roll your chain through and find the cutting tooth that looks smallest to your eye. This will be the tooth we will start on, and we will want to match all the other teeth as close by eye as possible to this one. On a relatively new chain, they will all be about the same. I like to put a mark on the first tooth I will sharpen. This just makes it easier to identify when you are finished. Place your round file into the tooth and match the angle of the top of the tooth, while keeping the file roughly perpendicular to the chain bar. With the guide, you can see that the angle most closely matches around 30 degrees, so that is what we will use for this chain. As you become more comfortable, you will probably dispense with a guide, as it is not strictly necessary and can be a bit clunky to use. It is very important that you only apply pressure on the forward stroke when doing your filing. On the back stroke, you can either slightly lift the file or actually remove it off of the tooth. As you get more used to this technique, you can do this very quickly just by adjusting the pressure in your hand. It's very important because trying to file in both directions with a file will ruin your file. With an even pressure, make 3 passes and then move on to the next tooth. If the next cutting tooth is a little bigger than the first one, you can make a few more passes until they appear to be even. If not, just do 3 passes and move on. Once you have completed all the teeth in one direction, switch sides and repeat the process for the other direction. At this point, you can go through and just lightly check with your finger to make sure that each tooth is sharp. I usually quickly inspect the chain every time I use it, and I will check for sharpness at least once every hour or so of use, depending on the type of wood and conditions. The rakers, on the other hand, really only need to be checked every so often. To use the gauge guide, set it so it sits on the top of the teeth, with the end beside a raker. Holding the guide steady, see if the raker is above the gauge. If it is, use the flat file to bring it even or just below the guide. Once it is at the correct height, you can also use the file to round the front edge over slightly. Now this process can also be done using just the flat file as a guide, but you must have a good idea of what the proper gap is or use a feeler gauge. But another good use of the guide is to clean out the groove in your bar. The last thing we are going to check every so often is the edges of the bar. As the chain runs in the bar, it will cause a burr to form on the edges. Run the flat file at a 45-degree angle around the edges of your bar to remove this burr. It should just take a light touch and a few seconds. So as I said earlier in the video, for a limited time you can get a chain free from Hipa. Just visit our website between 8/19 and 8/21/2023 and use the code Hipa. I'll put a link in the description that will take you directly to all the chains included in this deal. It is a great way to try out one of our quality chains. And just so you know, I've been using these chains for a year now, and I find them comparable in every way to the higher priced chain brands. So thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you found this video useful, and I encourage you to visit hypastore.com for all your small machine parts needs.